Hey there, so we're in week 4, I believe. We're covering the topic of self-observation. We also just slid into the second module, which relates to self-awareness. So in this course, we're discussing, obviously, communication with young children and their parents and families especially. And a major part of what makes communication work is a what makes it work well and effectively is a pretty consistent checking in with oneself as you're being the listener or the sender, right? In communication, one typically there's a explicit sender, that's one person who's talking, and an explicit listener, that's the one who's receiving. We're of course always sending signals back and forth, and we'll especially talk more about that when we get to active listening. But for today, what I want us to focus on is what it means to be as self-aware as possible, so that things that are unconscious or non-conscious, things that happen in our reactive emotional circuits in our body and our brain, don't actually impede the process of communication and lead to it breaking down. So I'm going to get into more detail about kind of what that means throughout this. So follow along in the PowerPoint. That's basically what I'm doing here. So I've given you a lot of information on a couple of somewhat complex topics. Your reading for this week is admittedly a really difficult read. At least it can be. So I'm halfway apologetic about that, but I'm only saying that because it's actually pretty important to be able to grapple with difficult things to read. And the purposes for the reading this week relate to why it's important to to practice self-observation skills, like why even do it. So I'm going to talk to you for a second about a couple of the things that relate to that reading, and one of them is the term neuroception. So that's not mentioned in the article, but I've given a couple of references at the end of the PowerPoint for a man named Stephen Porges or Porges. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name actually, but he developed a theory called the Polyvagal Theory, and it's a pretty interesting way of looking at how people react and how people move from a state of feeling comfort and ease and connection with others to how a person can move to that reactive state of being flooded with emotion. And then it has a lot of implications for trauma too. So if you're going to end up working, especially in fields where you will deal directly with trauma, I would especially highly recommend you look more into that. Just YouTube his name, and it's a pretty popular topic, and you can even hear him describe some of it. But first, a note about reactivity. When I say reactivity, what I mean is when, especially in strong emotional moments, our what's called the sympathetic branch of our autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is parts of the nervous system in the body and brain that act without our decision to act. Okay, so the way our heart beats is a result of the autonomic nervous system. We're breathing constantly as a result of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic really just means automatic, so you can think of that. The sympathetic branch, or the nerves that connect, or the actions that result from the nerves that connect, what's called the sympathetic branch, is basically like the gas pedal of our bodies. It makes our heart beat faster, it makes us breathe faster and shallower, it makes our muscles tighten up, it shuts our digestive system down so that our body sends blood to other parts of our body. And it's generally, when that is enacted, it's generally called the fight or flight. And I'm sure most of you have heard of that. If you're in a fight or flight state, you kind of know it. At least you can look back and know that you were there. You'll feel very agitated or very worried or basically overwhelmed with certain types of negative emotion. Okay? So that's what it means by reactivity. It's worth noting that when we are in a state of reactivity, okay, of anger, of irritation, of worry, of anxiety, something like that, it's worth thinking about the fact that our thoughts and feelings are not things that we have. They have us, in a sense. And the reason that that's the case is that we're a little less in control of ourselves, the way we respond to our thoughts and feelings. We're in a little less control of that. That's why it's pretty important to pay attention to that state of reactivity. So that's one main reason of self-observation, to pay attention to what it's like to move from a state of calm to a state of unrest. Okay? And that's going to play a major role in communication. When you communicate with people and you're in one of two of those states, different things result from the conversation. All right, so quickly a few things about empathy. Empathy is another good reason to be self-aware or to have self-observation skills, because the way that empathy actually works is that I'm gonna get ahead of myself here. Let me tell you about neuroception first. Neuroception is a combination of two words: neuro or neuron, which relates to brain cells or nerves in the central nervous system, and perception, which has to do with taking in information about what we see and hear and feel around us. Neuroception can be thought of as an unconscious process. It's not something that you do like when you look with your eyes one place or another, you visually perceive or have perception. It's not like that. It happens without your knowledge or without your control. And its main purpose is basically for your central nervous system, for your nervous system in your body and brain to scan your environment all the time, just all the time, to check for threat and to check for safety. Am I safe or am I under threat? That is its job, and it does it constantly. And it influences how you think, what you think, how you interpret things. It even impacts how you perceive, how you see things, how you hear things. You're more likely to see threat when you feel you're under threat, and you're more likely to see safety when you feel you're in safety, basically. Okay? Or hear or feel those things. So, sorry, I have a dog here, so he might bark. Threat and safety, that's the main thing. And a major part of how empathy works is a result of what could be thought of as the resonance system. So I'm going to try to scan through this really quickly. There's a lot on that PowerPoint slide, but it's actually still an oversimplification, and I really just want you to get the gist of it. So here's the basic gist. We perceive things. That means we see things, we hear things, or we have feelings about them, and that's perception too. Particular type of neurons in our brain called mirror neurons are activated. Now, mirror neurons were discovered when scientists in Italy, I think, were studying a certain type of monkey, and they had their brains hooked up to be scanned, or I think it was the EEGs that they were, and it probably wasn't EEGs, I'm not sure what they were doing, but they were watching the monkey's brains. And one of the scientists happened to have been eating peanuts, I think. And what the monkey's brain did was really remarkable. When the monkey perceived the person eating peanuts, the parts of the brain that the monkey would use to lift and eat a peanut itself were activated. So the monkey was just stationary, sitting there and watching, but the brain of the monkey was simulating eating, simulating picking up and putting to the mouth and chewing and swallowing, which is a pretty astonishing thing. That's the same reason that if I do this, like if you watch my hand, then parts of your brain, and you might even feel it in like the side of your mouth, maybe you don't, but sometimes you might, parts of your brain are watching me and see the intention of something like drinking, even though I'm not holding a glass of water. But your brain is scanning for my intention because you're looking at my actions, especially in the face. So mirror neurons are activated. the brain is ready to is checking out the intention of the other and mapping it onto your own body. And the way that it does that is through unconscious changes in the body. So this is before you actually see it. Your brain sees it first, makes changes in your body, like changes your heart rate, changes glands on the skin, changes muscular tone or tension, changes your breathing, changes your digestive activity, and so on. And this is all under your awareness. You're not aware of this because it happens really, really fast, within milliseconds. That sensory information about the body changes that the brain just made, goes back up through the brain and goes through several portions of the brain, namely the what's called the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, which are parts of the brain like toward the front. And then it eventually gets to the prefrontal cortex, which is right about here. That's what makes us human, a special part of our brain. That's when we know we're seeing and we know we're sensing what it is in the body. And that's when we get a map of our body, in a sense. We're kind of mapped out of what we feel in our body. And that, by the time it gets there, it has an emotional charge to it. And the emotional charge is either that it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Okay, so the reason that that's important, that resonance circuit, is that that's how empathy actually arises. That's how we feel empathy for others, is that we see their intention or their state of some sort, and we actually feel it ourselves because our body maps it onto itself. And then we perceive our body feeling that way. Okay, so I hope, I hope that was somewhat clear. And that was a very, very quick scan through a pretty in-depth topic. But so hopefully you get the idea of how empathy and self-observation might tie together. Okay, and I'd be glad if some of you want to know more about that and point you in the right direction. But that's all I'll let you know for now. Another couple of quick notes about the autonomic nervous system related to what's called the Polyvagal Theory, which is Porges's idea. So he's postulated that there's three branches or three main ways that we respond to the outside world. And one is called the social engagement system. When everything's good, our neuroceptive scan tells us we're safe. So we basically settle in to a state of attachment, of attaching and bonding. We turn toward looking to others. We turn to settling in social situations and things like that. You know when you're there because it feels good. Basically, it feels very good. It's one of the things about bonding and in parent-child relationships, for instance, that makes that feel so good, that makes it work. And so if that's knocked offline, however, if there's some perception of threat, neuroperception of threat, then the sympathetic nervous system, which is already kind of activated but had been kept at bay, begins to impact the body. That's when the fight-flight occurs. Okay, so we've already kind of talked a little bit about that. That's the gas pedal. It tends to make us mobilize or get ready to act or in some way. Now, there's another third layer, which is an immobilizing layer. So if things are so bad, traumatic, and we don't know that we will be able to handle it, or our body doesn't know it will be able to handle it, a part of the parasympathetic nervous system, that's the brake pedal of the body, which isn't always bad. It's just that at a certain point, our body doesn't know what to do and basically cuts itself off. Okay, so but if we are able to do that or tap into that break or the cutting off of activity, we can actually experience what could be thought of as a rest and digest. Okay, so at an extreme trauma level, it actually makes us faint. Okay, so it knocks us out. And slows our heart, slows our breathing, and can be really dangerous. So it can do that, but if we're feeling safe and we also tap into the parasympathetic nervous system like that, then we just simply feel really calm, and we're not dropped. The bottom doesn't drop out in that same way. So there's much more to be able to illustrate the details of that. But basically, what I want you to get out of that short description is that you and everyone else in the world moves through different stages of activation and inactivation in your body and your brain. And the way you notice it is how you feel, how you observe how you feel and think about it. So you're either actively moving to engage with others in a positive way, or you're actively uncomfortable or angry or anxious, or you're inactive in either. Hopefully none of you have experienced inactive in an extremely traumatic way, but that does happen, or you're extremely inactive or settled and calm in a very pleasant way. Okay, so those are kind of states we can fluctuate through, and the way that our body moves from one to the next has a lot to do with our environment, where we are, who we're interacting with, what's happening in that conversation or in that circumstances. So a word about emotion. Emotion can be thought of as emotion, something that evokes motion. Emotion isn't localized like to one area of our brain or one area of our body. It's really an embodied process throughout the whole body. And emotion serves as a guidance system. So it leads us through by telling us to go here, don't go there, basically. And emotions get more complex than that, of course, but at root, it basically tells us to approach something or withdraw from it. That's what emotions essentially do. Okay, so I want to discuss with you a little bit about what leads to the attitude that I'm going to suggest that you experiment with in regards to self-observation. To be clearly observant of one's thoughts and feelings. One, in some way or another, has to adopt an attitude that is typically described as a mindful attitude. Now, mindfulness, that word is something that isn't defined in one way. It's defined in many ways. But one way that I'm going to propose that you try on and see for yourself what it's like for you is to define what mindfulness as being a combination of three different skills. One of concentration, skills meaning that we can learn it and practice it and we get better at it. Concentration means focusing on what's relevant and letting other things go. Clarity, which means that we see that thing or hear that thing or think that thing with a lot of resolution, with clarity. We see it fully in a certain sense. And then also another skill that is described with a word that you might not have heard of, which is equanimity. Another way to think of equanimity is a certain type of acceptance, non-resisting or not fighting with what's happening in your thoughts and feelings, say. And a phrase that could be helpful to remember is letting things come and go without push and pull. Okay? So there's more to a lot of that, but I'm going to leave it at that because I'm going to get to asking you to try that out a little bit, and I'll let you know what that's like. But I didn't mention that where I'm getting this information from is a certain system of teaching people mindfulness skills, which is called unified mindfulness. I really encourage anybody who's interested in it to look it up. I've given you a couple of resources to do that. There's a free training course that you can go through, lots to read about. But in that system, it's proposed to think about all of the things that you experience around you in your environment, but also mentally and emotionally, as being able to be classified or categorized in one of three categories of see, of hear, and of feel. And we're going to go over that in just a minute. The 5 facets of mindfulness I've put here because I've uploaded the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire on Blackboard, and I want you to fill that out for yourself and score it. The way you score it at the end, you can ask me for clarification if you'd like, but they give you instructions to score it, and basically you just tally up and add up the numbers, except some you reverse. So it's a Likert scale, so it's like 1 to 5 or something like that you select. And if it's a reverse, it might just have an R by it on the scoring legend. Say if you selected 4 out of 5, you would score it as the reverse, so it would be 2. Okay, so 1 and 5 would be the reversals, 2 and 4 would be the reversals, and 3 in the middle would be the same. Okay, if it's a 7-point scale, it's the same thing. 1 and 7 are reversed because they're opposite one another. 2 and 6 are reversed because they're opposite one another. And so again, I'll type up some instructions or give an example of something if anybody needs to. Just let me know. But there are 5 facets in that questionnaire of observing, describing, non-judging, non-reacting, and acting with awareness. Those are just ways that people can assess what level of mindfulness a person brings to their experience. Okay? And you don't have to share your results of that with me or anyone else, but I just want you to try it, and I'll be and there's something on Blackboard for you to follow up with questions about it. Another way to think about this attitude of observation is open, receptive, curious, non-judgmental, accepting, allowing, interested. Those are ways that we attitudes that we take on so that when we're paying attention to our own thoughts and feelings, we do so in an interested and open and receptive and allowing way, rather than wishing I wasn't thinking this, telling myself I shouldn't feel this way, fighting with our experience, okay? So the research article, I've just given a couple of the main topics on one slide and asked you some questions as a quiz on Blackboard. I edited or marked up that article, so hopefully that's a little bit helpful. I've marked up the places that you should read with X's, and I've crossed out that X's being the place you do read, and I've crossed out places that you don't have to, and I've highlighted a bunch, so hopefully that can help guide you. And keep in mind, this is a research article, so it's somewhat dense, or research articles can be. Do your best to try to get as much out of it as you can. Read it in an informational text kind of way. You may end up having to reread a couple of parts of it, or you may put it down and reread the whole thing again later to try to get it. Try not to just zip through it though. Like, try to soak out of it what you can. Okay, so I want to go quickly through a couple of things about specifically on mindfulness, and this is the main vehicle that we're going to use to get to what it's like to observe oneself. So I'm already at minute 23, so I'm not going to go into all the details of see, hear, and feel like it's typed up here. I'll just quickly make the distinction of see out, see, hear, feel out, see, hear, feel in. Okay, and those again are those categories that I'm going to ask you to track in just a minute when we try something. But see out is basically physical sights around you. Hear out is any physical sounds around you. And feel out is your physical sensations of the body that don't feel emotional. Like I can feel a shirt on my skin, I can feel my feet on the floor. Those don't feel emotional in any way. Now, they might, in some circumstances, those sensations might feel emotional to a person, but right now they don't to me, so they're considered feel out, just in physical sensations. There's also feel in, that I've kind of covered first because that's to do with the body, and that basically means emotional type body sensations. If someone stormed in here and started yelling at me ferociously, I would probably have some activity in my chest or stomach or muscles or something like that. Those sensations in my muscles and my organs in my body, my heart and lungs and stuff, those would be considered feel in. Okay, they would be emotional type body sensations. They're typically kind of heightened emotional centers in the body, like straight up and down, basically. The forehead and the face, the throat, why your voice changes when you get irritated or angry, your heart and lungs, your sternum, where there's a big collection of nerves there, your stomach, and your intestines, things we don't usually pay a lot of attention to, but they're sensations that are there that are very emotional. Also, there are different ways to explore what we find when we observe our feelings and thoughts. I've given some ideas about how you might think about that. So the example I gave, someone shouting at me and then I'm having an emotional reaction to it or response to it, I might notice my heart started speeding up, my stomach kind of dropped. Another more detailed way of thinking about that, or to describe that to myself, is to really locate the space that they're taking. Like I could think of the actual sensations of the heart taking a circle, right? Not here, but more sort of toward the center. It kind of has a type of density. It might feel dense. It might feel more loose. I can notice it change over time. Those are just details about what I notice when I'm observing myself and thoughts and feelings that can be helpful to give as much clarity as possible. Okay, so for here, see in and hear in, that basically means the visual, the mental images and mental talk that we experience in our minds. And I'm certain that all of you have had experience with that, where you have we all have imagination. You might daydream and kind of picture something in your mind. When you remember things, you often draw them up to memory in visual, kind of like you have a movie screen in your mind. That is what's referred to by see in. Instead of sights around us, we're talking about the sights in our mind. Okay, hear in is the same thing, except rather than physical sounds, we're usually hearing that inner voice, the inner dialogue. We're either replaying conversations in our head, or we have that voice that we kind of, our conscience or our inner critic, one of the two, or something like that. But I'm sure all of you have had that experience of just when you're thinking thoughts, you notice hearing yourself thinking, basically. So thoughts that you hear. That also applies to if you're a song stuck in your head or something like that. It's just thoughts that you hear. They can be more obvious, like very clear and vivid, but much of the time thoughts that take form in visual or auditory like that, see in and hear in, they're pretty subtle. We have to really stop and turn inward to pay attention to them. And they typically aim our attention toward the future in planning, toward the past and remembering, or toward the present and fantasizing. Okay? So those are ways that our attention is jerked around by those things. Okay, so for 5 minutes now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically lead you through a mental exercise that aims at practicing self-observation. And I'm going to ask you to do this with me on the video here, but I've also typed up some written instructions on Blackboard that you can do on your own, or you can follow along as I guide you through this too. And I'm going to be asking you to do some more with this. So this will be something you can return to in this video, but it'll also be something that I'll point you back to in the future. So if you're in a place where you might be distracted, if there's a lot of people or something like that, you can just listen to this portion and come back to it later, or you can stop it and find a place where you won't be disrupted or disturbed. Try to find a place where you can be alone for 5 minutes, where you won't have lots of distractions or things pulling you away. So this is a mindfulness practice in a formal way, a formal sense. Okay, so it's going to be something that I'm going to ask you to put everything else down for and just focus on this mental activity. Okay, so if you have a phone with you, set it down, turn it on silent, something like that. If the TV or radio's on, turn them off, and disengage in conversation things. Okay. So I'm going to ask that you sit still and upright in a way that's comfortable, but where you don't feel like you have to move for a little bit. So try to remain relatively still. And for the next few minutes, for the next 5 minutes, I want you to just pay attention to my voice. You can leave your eyes open, or you can close them, or you can leave them half closed. And all I'm going to ask you to do is think about all of the things that you experience as being divided into one of those three categories I mentioned of see, hear, or feel. And first, I'd like to ask you to just let your attention move to different things around you, different sights, different sounds, or different physical sensations in the body. So you may notice objects around you, different colors, different shapes and sizes, different distances, or different sounds as they come and go. Some are quiet, some are louder, some are close, and some are far. And also notice different physical sensations in your body, physical sensations of sitting or standing, different physical sensations related to where your body's positioned and how it might be settling in or gently moving in one place or another. And whatever arises, just let your attention move to that place, that sight, that sound, or that physical sensation. And each time your attention settles on something, do your best to use your mental voice and say the word silently to yourself that fits the category. So as I'm looking at a rug on the floor, I'll say to myself, see, using a silent voice in my mind as I hear sounds around me or even the silence around me, but my attention is drawn there. I say silently to myself the word hear. And likewise, I feel my feet on the floor and my attention for some reason is moved there, and I say the word feel silently to myself. Do your best for the next few moments on your own and silently to label, see, hear, and feel in sights and sounds and physical sensations around you. Letting all thoughts and feelings just be in the background for now. Just paying attention to outward sights, outward sounds, and physical sensations. Labeling with see, hear, and feel. And focusing in on what you notice each time you label before letting your attention go somewhere else. If this activity is new and it feels unusual or strange, that's all right. Just do your best to notice what's around you. Use whatever's there. Use whatever sounds come up. Use whatever sights are there, whatever physical sensations are there. And label silently, see, hear, or feel, and focus in on what you notice, just for a few seconds. Okay, now what I'd like to ask you to do is let those sights and sounds and physical sensations just be there in the background. And for this, you may close your eyes if they were open before. And this time, turn your attention and let your attention move to different mental images, different mental talk, and any emotional sensations you have in your body. This is see, hear, and feel inwardly. So you're paying attention to different thoughts that you have or different thoughts that you notice. Some thoughts will be thoughts that you see, some that you hear, and you might be feeling sensations that could be emotional in the body. And just as before, do your best to let your attention move wherever it moves, and when it settles on a certain thought or feeling, certain mental image or mental talk or emotional feel, label with the words see, hear, or feel, and focus in on it for just a few seconds before letting your attention move to another thought or feeling. If you're bored, notice in the body where you feel boredom, or if you have thoughts related to boredom, and label those thoughts or those feelings with see, hear, or feel. If you get lost in thought, do your best to notice whether the thought is a visual thought or an auditory thought, and label see or hear. And any emotion in the body, label feel. Okay, so that was about 5 minutes of what it's like to sit down and practice some skills of observing oneself. We started with the outer environment of sights and sounds, and then physical sensations, and then turned more inward to subjective experience like thoughts and feelings that are often interrupted and influenced by different things. My puppy who's sitting right here added to the sonic environment a little bit. And when things like that happen, you probably noticed either some thought activation, or I know for me it was like it surprised me, so my stomach kind of jumped. Those can be instances where we're thrown off track in distraction, or they could be instances where we notice, okay, that was here because I heard the dog, or might have thoughts in my mind about, oh, now the dog's barking and I'm supposed to be recording this thing. That would be something that I might hear. And my stomach jumped, which was kind of like an emotional sensation, so I labeled that feel.